The alarms screamed through Threshold Station like dying animals. Captain Lee watched the tactical display turn red as another assembly warship vanished from the grid. That made 17 ships lost in the last hour. The Devourers were tearing through the galaxy's finest fleet like paper. All vessels retreat to defensive line Gamma, Commander Al's voice crackled over the command channel. The officer sounded calm, almost bored. This was standard procedure for them. Fall back, consolidate, wait for reinforcements. I repeat, all vessels fall back immediately. A second officer, Lieutenant Park, looked up from her console. Captain, we're being ordered to retreat. I heard, said quietly. She studied the holographic battlefield floating above the command table. The Devourers moved like a swarm of insects, their black ships blocking out the stars. They were pushing toward Threshold Station where 2 million civilians sheltered. The assembly retreat would leave a gap. The swarm would pour through it. The captain pressed. Touched the communication panel. Perseverance to Assembly Command. We're not retreating. Silence filled the channel for 3 seconds. Then Al's voice returned, sharp with anger. Captain Lee, you will follow orders. Fall back to defensive line Gamma. A negative command. We're engaging. You have 1 frigate against their entire forward swarm. This is suicide. Probably, agreed. She cut the channel and turned to her crew. 23 humans looked back at her. They were young, most of them. Earth's military was still small compared to the ancient assembly forces, but every person on this bridge knew what came next. They'd trained for it. Helm, take us into the thickest part of their formation, ordered. Engineering, I need every spare component ready to jettison on my mark. Weapons, forget the targeting computers. Manual fire only. A specialist Menu's voice came from engineering. Captain, you want me to dump our spare parts into space? Everything that isn't bolted down, Menu, and some things that are. The Perseverance turned away from the retreating assembly fleet, brought up the weapon systems, her fingers dancing across manual controls that most species hadn't used in centuries. Through the Devourer swarm grew larger. Their ships were organic things, grown rather than built, pulsing with sickly purple light. Here they come, said. The first Devourer ship fired, watched the energy blast arc toward them. Hard port, drop 50 meters, roll 30 degrees. The Perseverance twisted in space. The blast missed by 5 meters. The assembly forces would have raised shields and tanked the hit. Humans didn't have shields that strong, so they moved instead. Return fire, target the big one on the left, said. That's a capital ship, Captain. Our weapons won't. Fire at its weapon ports, make it flinch. Fired. The rounds were too small to damage the massive Devourer vessel, but they struck exactly where the enemy was charging its main cannon. The capital ship jerked sideways, its shot going wide. "Menu, dump cargo bay 1, ordered. In the tactical display, a cloud of metal debris exploded from the Perseverance's side. Spare engine parts, broken equipment, even their backup food storage containers tumbled into space. 3 Devourer fighters flew directly into the cloud at high speed. Metal tore through organic hulls. 2 fighters exploded. 1 spiraled away, trailing atmosphere. "They're swarming us," called out. 40 no 50 contacts incoming. Smiled grimly. "Good, closer they get, better our odds." On Threshold Station, Ambassador watched the battle through the command center's massive windows. The other assembly members stood frozen, their various forms rigid with shock as they watched the human ship do the impossible. "Madness," High Chancellor hummed, his crystalline body resonating with distress. "They're flying directly into the enemy formation. No shields, no support, no retreat plan." "That's how humans fight," said quietly. "We learned on a world where retreat usually meant death anyway." Back on the Perseverance, gripped her chair as the ship bucked from another near miss. "Menu, how's our reactor?" "Running hot, Captain, real hot. We keep this up, we'll breach containment in 20 minutes. Then we'll finish in 19. Target that cluster of fighters at bearing 270. Captain, they're too close. The explosion will damage us." "That's fine." Fired. The missile streaked into the Devourer formation and detonated. The explosion consumed 5 enemy fighters. The shockwave slammed into the Perseverance, throwing everyone against their restraints. Hull breach alarms wailed. Tasted blood where she'd bitten her tongue. "Hull breaches on decks 3 and 5, someone reported. "Sealing now." "Keep moving," said. "Menu, I need an idea." "For what, Captain?" "That capital ship is their command vessel. I can tell by how the small ones orbit it. We need to kill it." A pause, then Menu's laugh crackled over the comm. "You're serious? Captain, we'd need to get within 50 meters and punch through its armor with—" "Oh no. Captain, please tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking." "Prep the reactor for emergency ejection," said calmly, "and set it to overload." "That's our only reactor." "We'll get a new one if we survive." On Threshold Station, the assembly watched as the Perseverance suddenly accelerated toward the Devourer capital ship. Al's scales rippled with confusion. What are they doing? The human frigate spun wildly, firing in all directions. It looked completely out of control. The Devourers must have thought so too, because they stopped targeting it. Why waste ammunition on a dying ship? 50 meters from the capital ship, the Perseverance's belly split open. Something massive ejected directly at the Devourer vessel. The reactor core, glowing white-hot and screaming into overload. "All crew, brace for," was all got out before the reactor detonated. The explosion was small by space warfare standards, but at point-blank range against an organic hull, it was devastating. The Devourer capital ship simply ceased to exist. The shockwave caught the Perseverance and flung it spinning into space. On the bridge, emergency lights flickered. His head rang. She could hear coughing somewhere in the smoke. "Damage report," she managed to say. "Everything's damaged, Captain," Minu reported. He sounded far too cheerful. "But we're alive. Barely. Running on battery power. No engines, no weapons, just life support and a whole lot of hope." Through the smoke and sparking consoles watched the tactical display. The Devourer swarm had stopped advancing. Their command ship was gone. The smaller vessels milled about in confusion. And then, slowly, they began to retreat. They're withdrawing," whispered. Leaned back in her chair, every part of her hurt. "Of course they are. We just told them this fight costs too much." 6 hours later, the Perseverance limped back to Threshold Station, towed by an assembly recovery vessel. Half the human crew was in medical. The ship had 17 hull breaches. The reactor was gone. By any measure, it was a defeat. But the Devourers were gone. The station was safe. And every species in the assembly was asking the same question. How did 23 humans in one small ship do what their entire fleet could not? Ambassador stood at the docking bay when they brought Captain off the ship on a stretcher. She was conscious, arguing with the medics about needing to check on her crew first. "You have to explain this," Al said, appearing beside. "Your captain violated direct orders, used suicidal tactics, destroyed her own ship, and somehow won. The assembly demands answers." Watched as they carried away. "You want to know why humans fight like that?" "Yes." "Then I'll tell you about Earth," said quietly, "and you'll understand why we don't know how to quit." The Assembly War Council chamber was built for giants. The ceiling stretched 30 meters high, and the walls were covered in displays showing every corner of known space. Representatives from 47 species gathered in their designated atmospheric zones. Some breathed oxygen like humans. Others floated in methane bubbles or rested in pools of liquid hydrogen. Ambassador stood in the center of it all, feeling very small. General stood beside him, carrying a data tablet filled with files that would change everything. "Ambassador," High Chancellor began, his crystalline voice echoing through translation devices. "We convened this emergency session to understand what happened at Threshold Station. Your Captain Lee disobeyed direct orders and employed tactics that any sane military would classify as suicide. Yet she succeeded where our finest failed. Explain." Took a breath. He'd prepared for this moment during the entire journey from Earth. To understand how humans fight, you need to understand where we come from. We've read your planetary reports, War Chief growled. The massive warrior leaned forward, his four arms crossed. Earth is a standard Class M world, nothing special. That's where you're wrong, General said quietly. He activated the tablet and Earth appeared in the holographic display. Beautiful blue oceans, white clouds, green continents. This is Earth now. Let me show you Earth's history. The planet changed. Ice covered everything from the poles to the equator. 600,000 years ago, our world nearly froze completely. Early humans survived in small pockets, fewer than 10,000 individuals. Most species would have gone extinct. Humans adapted. The ice retreated, continents shifted. A massive volcanic eruption darkened the skies. 70,000 years ago, a supervolcano erupted. It blocked out the sun for years. Global temperatures dropped. Food chains collapsed. Human population fell to fewer than 3,000 individuals. We were nearly extinct, but we survived. The display cycled through disaster after disaster. Asteroid impacts. Climate swings from ice age to scorching heat and back again. Floods that reshaped continents. Droughts that lasted centuries. Your world tried to kill you, Archivist Ox buzzed, his eyes reflecting the holographic light. Repeatedly. Our world made us, corrected. Every species here evolved on stable planets, predictable climates, consistent resources. You developed civilization because your worlds allowed it. Earth forced us to develop civilization just to survive. Stepped forward, and we weren't just fighting the planet, we were fighting each other. The display changed to show human history. Armies clashing with swords and spears. Ships burning on ancient seas. Cities reduced to rubble. Then tanks rolling across battlefields. Aircraft dogfighting in burning skies. Mushroom clouds rising over devastated cities. We've fought each other for our entire existence, said. Not border disputes or trade disagreements. Total wars. Wars where entire nations ceased to exist. Wars that killed millions. We've been fighting for survival since before we discovered fire. Commander Al's scales flushed orange with distress. This is barbaric. Your species is traumatized. Our species is experienced, corrected sharply. Every conflict taught us something new. Every defeat showed us what doesn't work. Every victory came because we adapted faster than our enemy. He pulled up footage from Earth's military archives. The assembly watched in growing horror as human soldiers fought in conditions no other species would consider survivable. Urban combat in ruined cities, where every building could hide death. Jungle warfare where the environment itself was an enemy. Naval battles where damaged ships deliberately rammed opponents rather than sink alone. This is madness, said, but his voice held less certainty now. "You sacrifice everything for minor tactical advantages." "We sacrifice what's necessary to survive," said. "Let me show you our military doctrine." He pulled up Assembly Military Theory. It appeared in neat, organized columns, clear command structures, predictable formations, emphasis on preserving forces and equipment, retreat protocols when losses exceeded acceptable thresholds, surrender options when victory became impossible. "This is how civilized species wage war," said. "Calculated, rational, sustainable. This is how species fight when they have the luxury of losing," said bluntly. "Let me show you human doctrine." The display changed. The organized columns fractured into a web of interconnected concepts: decentralized command, individual initiative, acceptable losses, adaptation over planning, use of terrain, use of weather, use of enemy psychology, improvised weapons, tactical retreats that weren't surrenders but repositioning for better attacks, last stands where surrounded forces broke through superior numbers because surrender wasn't an option. "You assume every battle is a survival scenario," Ox observed, "even when it isn't." "Every battle is a survival scenario," said quietly, "because we learned that lesson when it was true. Our ancestors who thought otherwise died. The ones who survived were the ones who fought like every battle was their last." He pulled up footage from Threshold Station. The assembly watched as the Perseverance dove into the Devourer swarm. They watched as it used debris as weapons, dodged instead of tanking hits, and finally sacrificed its own reactor to kill the enemy command ship. "Captain Lee didn't do anything special," explained. "She fought exactly how every human officer is trained to fight: assess the situation, identify what you can sacrifice, identify what you can't lose, use everything available as a weapon, adapt constantly, never quit." "But she destroyed her own ship," Al protested. "She could have retreated to fight another day." "Retreat to where?" asked. "The Devourers would have pushed through and reached Threshold Station. 2 million civilians would have died. So Captain Lee made the calculation: 1 ship and 23 crew members against 2 million lives. The math was easy." "That's not how war works," said, but he sounded uncertain. "You preserve your forces. You win through superior numbers and firepower. That's how you fight wars you can afford to lose," said. "Humans fight every war like it's our last, because on Earth it usually was." The council chamber fell silent. The representatives looked at each other, then back at the humans. Finally spoke, his voice resonant with something that might have been fear. "You're telling us that your entire species is conditioned for desperate survival, that you have no concept of acceptable defeat." "We have plenty of defeats in our history," said, "but we never accepted them. We learned from them and came back stronger. Alarms suddenly blared through the chamber. A junior officer rushed in, his tentacles quivering with panic. High Chancellor, the Devourers have attacked 3 systems simultaneously. Assembly forces are requesting permission to consolidate defensive positions. Granted, said immediately. Pull back to... No, interrupted. Every eye in the chamber turned to him. You're doing exactly what they expect. The Devourers can predict your movements because you follow doctrine. They're a hive mind. They think in patterns and algorithms. Your predictability makes you easy targets. What do you suggest? Al asked. Looked at, the general nodded and pulled up a tactical display. Earth is sending a task force. Small ships, human crews, operating independently. We request permission to launch a counteroffensive while you consolidate. That's tactically insane, said. You'll be outnumbered 100-1. Yes, agreed. But we'll be unpredictable, and unpredictability is a weapon the Devourers have never faced. The Council argued for hours. Some species wanted to forbid the human plan, others were curious. Finally made his decision. The Assembly cannot officially sanction this plan. It violates every military protocol we've established over 10,000 years. He paused. However, if Earth wishes to deploy its forces independently, we cannot stop you. The blood will be on human hands. Bowed slightly. We're used to that, High Chancellor. As the council dispersed, Al approached the 2 humans. You really believe you can win fighting this way? Win, considered the question. Maybe, maybe not, but we'll survive, and that's what we're best at. 3 days later, Captain Lee stood on the bridge of a new ship, her injuries still healing. The human task force assembled around her. 12 frigates, 8 destroyers, and a stubborn refusal to quit. All ships this is, she transmitted. Remember your training, think like Earth taught you. Adapt like your life depends on it, because it does. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, heading toward impossible odds. On Threshold Station, Al watched them go. They're going to die, he said to no one in particular. Beside him, Archivist Ox made a sound that might have been laughter. Perhaps. But I suspect the Devourers are about to learn what Earth learned long ago. Humans are very hard to kill. The Helios cluster was a nightmare of navigation hazards. Dense asteroid fields spun through unstable gravity wells. 3 stars orbited each other in a chaotic dance, their radiation making sensors unreliable. It was the perfect place for an ambush, which was exactly why the Devourers had fortified it. Captain Lee studied the tactical display from the bridge of her new ship, the Defiance. Her ribs still ached from the Threshold Station battle, but she pushed the pain aside. 20 vessels floated behind her, waiting for orders. Observer Ara to Captain Lee. A melodic voice chimed through the calm. The assembly had insisted on sending a representative with the human fleet. Ara was a floating crystalline being who existed primarily as energy held together by magnetic fields. She'd been volunteered for what everyone assumed was a suicide mission. "Go ahead, observer," said. "I must protest this formation. Your ships are spreading out with no coordination. This violates fundamental fleet tactics. You'll be destroyed piecemeal." "That's the idea," replied. "All ships, you have your assignments. Remember, operate independently. Make your own decisions. Be unpredictable. Out." The fleet dispersed like seeds in the wind. Each ship chose its own vector into the Helios cluster. The Defiance dove toward the largest asteroid field, where radiation was thickest. On the assembly observation deck of ship, Ara's energy form pulsed with distress. She'd studied military theory for 3 centuries. This violated every principle she knew. Ships should support each other, maintain formation, coordinate fire. But the humans were acting like 20 independent pirates rather than a unified fleet. Lieutenant Park sat at the tactical station, now serving as executive officer. "Captain, picking up Devourer signatures. Looks like a patrol group, 6 ships. Can we hide from them?" "Not with conventional stealth, no." Smiled. "Then we'll hide unconventionally. Take us into that radiation pocket near the red giant. Get as close as you can." His hands flew across the controls. The Defiance turned sharply and accelerated toward a churning mass of stellar radiation. Heat warnings blared across every console. "Captain, our hull will barely hold together this close to a star," said. "Barely is good enough. Shut down everything except life support and maneuvering. Make us look dead." The Defiance drifted into the radiation storm. Outside, space itself seemed to burn. The Devourer patrol approached, their organic sensors scanning for threats. They passed within 2 kilometers of the human ship and kept going, unable to distinguish the small vessel from all the radiation noise. Waited until they were past. "Now, full power, all weapons, target their rear ship." The Defiance erupted from the radiation like a predator from ambush, tore into the surprised Devourer vessel before it could react. The organic ship ruptured, atmosphere venting into space. "A second target, then dive back into the radiation," ordered. They destroyed 2 Devourers before the others could respond. Then the Defiance vanished back into the radiation storm, leaving the confused aliens searching empty space. Ara's energy form flickered. You used the star as camouflage. That's not in any manual." "Manuals are for predictable situations," said. "Menu damage report." Specialist Menu's voice crackled from engineering. "Hull's got some heat damage, nothing structural. We can do that maybe 4 more times before the hull plating gives out. Then we'll do it 3 times and think of something new. Across the Helios cluster, similar chaos unfolded. Lieutenant Park's sister ship, Resilience, used the gravity of an unstable star to slingshot around enemy positions, attacking from impossible angles. Pilot O led a squadron of fighters that pretended to be damaged, drifting helplessly until Devourer ships came to investigate. Then they'd come alive all at once, weapons blazing. Sergeant Nam commanded a Marine detachment on the boarding ship Relentless. Their entire strategy was insane by assembly standards. Find a Devourer vessel, match velocity, cut through the hull, and fight hand-to-hand inside enemy ships. Boarding Team 1, we're locked on target, the Relentless's captain called out. Commencing breach in 3, 2, 1. The cutting torch burned through organic hull material. Atmosphere screamed out of the breach, and her Marines wore heavy armor, mag boots keeping them anchored. They pushed through into a corridor that pulsed like the inside of a living creature. "Contact front," someone shouted. Devourer drones scuttled toward them, all claws and teeth. The Marines opened fire with projectile weapons. Energy weapons would punch through the hull. Bullets were safer in close quarters. Shot 3 drones and smashed a 4th with her armored fist. Push forward. Find their control center. The Marines fought through twisting corridors. It was brutal, close-quarters combat. The kind the Devourers weren't prepared for because civilized species didn't board enemy ships anymore. Too dangerous, too unpredictable, too human. Dr. Hans Sora worked in a makeshift lab on one of the support vessels. She'd been studying captured Devourer specimens, trying to understand their biology. What she found was fascinating and terrifying. "They're a hive mind," she explained to over a secure channel. "Individual ships have minimal intelligence. They follow patterns calculated by central command vessels. It makes them incredibly coordinated." "Which means predictable," said. "Exactly. They calculate the most efficient response to any threat. But here's the thing. Their calculations assume rational behavior. They predict what a logical enemy would do. And we're not logical." "You're human," Sora said, and could hear the smile in her voice. "Every decision you make is influenced by instinct, experience, and creativity. The hive mind can't predict that. When you do something irrational like hiding in stellar radiation, their algorithms fail. Consider this. So we need to be as unpredictable as possible. Make them think the entire human species is insane," Sora agreed. The battle for Helios cluster lasted 6 days. The Devourers had numerical superiority, better weapons, and tactical positions. But every time they predicted where the humans would attack, the humans appeared somewhere else. Every time they set up an ambush, the humans avoided it through sheer random chance, or what looked like random chance. On the third day, the Defiance appeared to suffer catastrophic damage. It drifted toward a Devourer command ship, trailing atmosphere and debris. The hive mind calculated zero threat from a dying vessel. They ignored it. The Defiance drifted closer, closer. Inside, the crew had sealed themselves into protected sections, holding their breath, pretending to be dead. "A range 50 meters, whispered. "A 40 meters. "A 30 meters. His hand hovered over the detonation switch. 20 meters, now. The reactor core ejected and detonated. The Devourer command ship disintegrated. Emergency pods launched from the Defiance milliseconds before the shockwave hit, carrying the crew to safety. From her observation pod, Ara witnessed the explosion. She watched the humans celebrating their successful suicide mission. Celebrating. They destroyed their own ship, nearly killed themselves, and they were happy about it. "Perseverance to all pods," his voice came through. "Mission success. The resilience will pick us up. Good work, everyone." Ara couldn't process it. She'd been recording everything, sending reports back to the assembly. But words failed to capture the insanity she was witnessing. By the 6th day, the Devourers from Helios cluster. They'd lost 40% of their ships. The humans had lost 8 vessels completely destroyed and 12 more barely functional. By any calculation, it was a catastrophic defeat for the humans. "We won," said simply when the assembly called to offer condolences. "You lost 40% of your force," High Chancellor said. "But we're still here. The enemy isn't, that's winning." Ara finally spoke up, her energy form pulsing with confusion. "I've watched you for 6 days. You use tactics that should result in total annihilation. You destroy your own ships. You fight in conditions that should kill you. Yet you survive. How?" Looked at the crystalline being. "Because we learned to fight on a world that was trying to kill us every single day. We adapted to ice ages and volcanoes. We survived predators and diseases. We fought wars against each other for thousands of years. This," she gestured at the damaged ship around them, "this is just another Tuesday for humanity." In the wreckage of Helios cluster, the Devourers were already adapting. Their hive mind analyzed the human tactics and reached a conclusion. Humans were the primary threat, not because they were stronger, but because they were incomprehensible. The algorithms couldn't predict them. The swarm intelligence made a decision. If humans were the glue holding the assembly resistance together, then the solution was simple: destroy humanity completely. Far across the galaxy, Devourer ships began moving toward a single target: Earth itself. And the humans, exhausted and damaged but alive, had no idea what was coming. The training facility orbited a dead moon in neutral space. General watched as 500 assembly soldiers stumbled through what humans called a basic obstacle course. They were failing miserably. A young warrior named or hung from a climbing wall, his scales flushed with embarrassment. "I cannot complete this, General. It's impossible." "It's not impossible," said calmly. "Yesterday, a human teenager completed this course in 8 minutes. You've been trying for 40. Human teenagers are clearly genetic anomalies." Laughed. "No, they're just used to struggling. Try again. And this time don't think about the correct way to climb. Think about the fastest way, even if it's ugly." Across the training yard, Commander Al was learning the same lesson. His had been attacked 2 weeks ago. The Devourers had burned 3 cities before the assembly fleet arrived. Al had volunteered for human training immediately after, his scales permanently darkened with grief. "Again," the human instructor shouted. Sergeant Nam had been pulled from combat duty to teach. She was small compared to most species, but she moved like violence. "You're thinking too much. Stop planning and start reacting." Al faced the combat simulation. Holographic Devourer drones attacked from multiple angles. Assembly doctrine said to establish a defensive position and call for support. He tried that. The simulation killed him in 40 seconds. "You died," said bluntly. "Again, stop trying to fight by the book. The enemy doesn't care about your book." "What should I do?" Al demanded, frustrated. "Survive, use anything, break things, cheat. Make the enemy react to you instead of you reacting to them." He ran the simulation again. This time, when the drones appeared, he grabbed a piece of broken equipment and threw it at the closest one. While that drone was distracted, he ran toward a different group, using their own bodies as shields against the others. It was messy. It was ugly. It wasn't in any manual. He survived for 2 minutes. Better said, "Again." The training was brutal because it had to be. The Devourers were adapting. They'd learned to counter assembly tactics completely. Now they were targeting human forces with overwhelming numbers. The galaxy was losing on every front. Ambassador addressed the assembly in an emergency session. "You asked us to train your forces. We agreed. But we need to be honest about what that means." He pulled up statistics. Injury rates during training were 40% higher than assembly standards. 3 soldiers had died from training accidents. Mental stress evaluations showed widespread trauma from the exercises. "This is barbaric," one delegate complained. "You're breaking our soldiers." "We're teaching them to survive," corrected. "Earth didn't give us a choice. We learned these lessons through extinction events and world wars. You can learn them in training, or you can learn them when the Devourers are burning your worlds. Choose." The training continued. Humans taught alien species concepts that seemed insane, acceptable losses, tactical retreat that wasn't surrender, using the environment as a weapon, fighting with broken equipment, making decisions without waiting for orders. Was a floating gas being who'd never touched a solid object in her life. Combat seemed impossible for her species, but the human instructors found ways. You move through air, Pilot O explained. That means you can go places others can't. Tight spaces, ventilation systems, anywhere there's atmosphere. You're not a soldier. Your infiltration made flesh. She practiced moving through narrow pipes, carrying small explosive charges. Her people had been scholars and artists. Now she was learning to be a saboteur. Or was different. His species were warriors by nature, but they fought with honor codes and formal duels. Human combat had no honor. You fight dirty, he observed, watching Marines practice. We fight to win, replied. Honor is for after the battle when everyone's alive to appreciate it. He struggled with this. His entire culture was built on honorable combat, but his culture was also being exterminated by the devourers. Finally, he made a choice. Honor could evolve. His people couldn't if they were dead. 8 weeks into training, Al ran the combat simulation again. This time he survived 12 minutes. He used debris as weapons. He retreated when necessary, then ambushed his pursuers. He made decisions based on instinct rather than doctrine. When the simulation ended, he stood among holographic corpses, breathing hard. Nodded, now you're thinking like a human. No, Al said quietly. I'm thinking like someone who wants to live. That's what you've been teaching us. Not human tactics, survival tactics. The first test came at Sanctuary Prime. It was an assembly garden world, home to 20 million civilians. The Devourers attacked with a massive fleet, confident of easy victory. They'd fought assembly forces 100 times and won every engagement. But these weren't standard assembly forces anymore. Captain Lee commanded the defense from orbit. Beside her were 12 assembly captains, all graduates of human training. Remember what you learned, she transmitted. Forget the manual. Adapt or die. The battle began. The Devourers expected the defenders to form a standard line and trade shots. Instead, the mixed fleet scattered like the humans had taught them. Ships hid behind the planet's moons. Others dove into the atmosphere, using gravity and air resistance as shields. On the ground, Al commanded a mixed-species battalion. When the Devourer ground forces landed, they expected to fight a conventional battle. Instead, they found burning cities turned into fortresses. Every building became a weapons position. Every street became a kill zone. Fall back to the river, Al ordered, his scales steady despite the chaos. Assembly doctrine said to defend the city. Human doctrine said to use the city to bleed the enemy, then fall back to better positions. His troops retreated across the water. The devourers pursued, thinking they'd broken the defense. Al waited until half the enemy force was crossing the bridges. "Now," he said simply. Explosives planted under the bridges detonated. Thousands of devourer troops fell into the water. More troops opened fire from hidden positions on the far bank. It was an ambush, a trap, the kind of dishonorable, underhanded, effective tactic humans had taught him. "It's working," or said beside him, wonder in his voice. "We're winning." In orbit, fleet had lost 3 ships, but they'd destroyed 15 devourer vessels. The enemy kept trying to predict their movements and failing. Human doctrine had taught the assembly forces to be unpredictable, to make independent decisions, to adapt constantly. Dr. Hansara watched from the command ship's science station. "Captain, I'm seeing something strange in devourer movements. They're hesitating." "Explain," said. "The hive mind makes decisions based on probability, but we're giving them too many variables. Every ship in our fleet is making different tactical choices. They can't calculate which threat to prioritize." "Chaos is a weapon," said, smiling grimly. "Humans learned that 10,000 years ago." The battle for Sanctuary Prime lasted 3 days. When it ended, the devourers had withdrawn. The planet was damaged but intact. 20 million civilians were alive. The victory cost them 40% casualties, cities in ruins, equipment destroyed. By assembly standards, it was barely a win, but they'd held. For the first time since the war began, an assembly force had defended a world successfully. News of the victory spread across the galaxy. Other worlds requested human training. The assembly military, facing extinction, finally accepted what they should have known from the start. Their 10,000 years of civilized warfare doctrine was useless against an enemy that didn't play by civilized rules. On the training moon addressed a new batch of recruits, thousands of them now from dozens of species. "You're here because your old way of fighting isn't working. I'm going to teach you how humans fight. It won't be pleasant. You'll question everything you know about warfare. But you'll learn the most important lesson Earth ever taught. When survival is on the line, there's no such thing as fighting dirty. There's only alive and dead." Al stood nearby, now an instructor himself. His scales had regained some color, but his eyes held the hard edge of someone who'd seen too much death. A young recruit approached him nervously. "Commander Al, sir, is it true you held Sanctuary Prime with forces that were outnumbered 10 to 1? "Yes," Al said. "How?" "I stopped fighting and started fighting like someone from Earth. I learned that retreat isn't surrender. That honor doesn't matter if you're dead. that every piece of terrain is a weapon if you're creative enough. He looked at the young recruit. And I learned that humans aren't special warriors. They're just the species that never learned to quit. Far across the galaxy, in the depths of unexplored space, the devourer hive mind was calculating. The assembly was adapting, learning human tactics. This was unacceptable. The hive mind made a decision: destroy the source. If humans were teaching the galaxy to resist, then humanity itself must be eliminated. 70% of the entire devourer swarm changed course. Their new target, a small blue planet called Earth. And the humans, celebrating their victory at Sanctuary Prime, had no idea there was about to face the largest invasion force ever assembled. The warning came from a deep space monitoring station at the edge of Sol system. Ensign Bora was on routine watch when her sensors went insane. Thousands of contacts, then tens of thousands. The entire screen turned red with hostile signatures. "Command, this is Observatory 7, she transmitted, her voice shaking. "I'm seeing. I don't know what I'm seeing. It's the entire Devourer fleet, and they're heading for Earth." On Earth, General received the report and felt ice flow through his veins. He pulled up the tactical display. The Devourers had committed 70% of their total forces. It wasn't an attack. It was an extermination. "How long?" he asked. 18 hours until they reach Mars orbit. 24 hours until they reach Earth. Activated the emergency broadcast. "All human forces, return to Sol system immediately. All civilians, begin evacuation to underground shelters. This is not a drill." Captain Lee was 3 systems away when the call came. Her fleet was damaged from recent fighting, but she didn't hesitate. "All ships, plot course for Earth. Maximum speed." Lieutenant Park looked at the tactical display showing their fleet's condition. Half their ships were held together with emergency patches. "Captain, we'll barely make it back in time." "Then we'll barely make it," said. "Earth is home. We don't abandon home." The message reached assembly space within the hour. Ambassador stood before the High Council, trying to maintain his diplomatic composure while his world faced annihilation. "The Devourers are attacking Earth with overwhelming force," he said simply. "We request immediate assistance." High Chancellor's crystalline form dimmed with sorrow. "Ambassador, we cannot help. Our forces are scattered across 100 worlds. By the time we mobilize, Earth will already be dead, finished. You can say it, we know the odds." "Then evacuate," pleaded. "Save who you can. The Assembly will grant your people refugee status on any world you choose." Looked at the assembled representatives. "Humanity thanks you for the offer, but we're not evacuating. Earth is our home. We'll defend it." "That's suicide," War Chief said. but his voice held respect rather than mockery. Probably, agreed, but we're human. Suicide stands are kind of our specialty. What the assembly didn't expect was what happened next. Commander Al heard the news and immediately ordered his fleet to Sol system, or did the same, and dozens of other assembly commanders who trained under human instruction made the same choice. You'll never reach Earth in time, their superiors protested. Then we'll arrive in time to avenge them, Al said. But humans taught us to fight. The least we can do is fight beside them. On Earth, people watched the sky with a strange calm. They knew what was coming. Vid screens showed the Devourer fleet approaching, blotting out the stars. It should have caused panic. Instead, humans around the world did what they always did when facing extinction. They prepared to fight. In Seoul, 70-year-old former Soldier Park helped younger people reinforce buildings. I fought in the border wars, he told them. Buildings make good fortresses if you use them right. Stack furniture here, create firing positions there. Every room is a potential ambush. In New York, teenage student helped organize evacuation to the subway systems. Deep underground, multiple exits, easily defended. We can hold there if the surface falls. All across Earth this pattern repeated. Humans didn't flee, they fortified. They armed themselves with whatever they could find. They made plans to resist. General coordinated the defense from orbital command. His fleet was pathetic compared to what approached. 200 ships against 50,000 Devourer vessels. But he'd spent his entire life studying warfare. He knew one truth: numbers weren't everything. All ships defensive formation Delta, he ordered. We're not trying to win the space battle. We're buying time for ground forces to prepare. Captain's fleet arrived 12 hours before the Devourers. Her ships were barely functional, crews exhausted, ammunition nearly depleted. General, the Defiance reporting for duty. Where do you need us? Anywhere you can make a difference, Captain. Studied the tactical situation. 50,000 enemy ships. The orbital defense platforms were powerful but stationary. The Devourer fleet would overwhelm them through sheer numbers. Unless... What's the status of our reactor? Barely holding together, Captain. Why? Because we're going to do something incredibly stupid one more time. 6 hours before the attack, the Assembly Volunteer fleet arrived. Al's ship limped into formation beside the human vessels. He opened a channel to General, Commander Al reporting. We brought everyone who would come. Looked at his display. 200 more ships had just appeared. Damaged, undermanned, representatives from 40 different species. All of them had trained with humans. All of them had volunteered to defend Earth. Why did you come? Asked. This isn't your fight. You taught us how to survive, Al said simply. Now we return the favor." The Devourer fleet arrived like a plague. 50,000 ships dropped out of hyperspace and began their assault. The hive mind calculated victory within hours. Earth's defenders were too few, too scattered, too weak. The calculation was wrong. The first wave of devourers hit Earth's orbital defenses expecting organized resistance. Instead, they found chaos. Human ships didn't form neat battle lines. They scattered, using every piece of space debris as cover. The assembly volunteers, trained in human tactics, did the same. Defiance positioned itself among the orbital stations. "All ships, remember Threshold Station," she transmitted. "Use everything as a weapon." The battle began, and Earth's defenders fought exactly how humans had always fought, with creativity, desperation, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. Orbital platforms fired until their barrels melted, then exploded their remaining ammunition in suicide blasts. Ships with damaged reactors flew into devourer formations and detonated. Fighters used damaged vessels as shields, attacking from unexpected angles. On the ground, the first devourer troops landed in Beijing. They expected organized military resistance. Instead, they found a city turned into a fortress. Every building was fortified. Every street had traps. Civilians fought alongside soldiers, using improvised weapons and knowledge of their own city to create killing zones. Park had fought in 3 wars. Now he fought in a 4th from his apartment building. "Wait until they're in the courtyard," he told the young people beside him. "Then drop everything on them. Furniture, bricks, boiling water, whatever we have." In Mumbai, devourer forces pushed into the metro system. They thought they'd trapped civilians underground. Instead, they entered a labyrinth of tunnels where humans knew every passage and the aliens knew nothing. Ambushes came from everywhere and nowhere. In orbit, the battle was carnage. Earth's defenders were losing. 30% casualties, 50%. The numbers climbed, but they kept fighting. Al's ship had lost engines and weapons. The Devourer command vessel approached to finish him. His crew prepared to abandon ship. "No," Al said. "Redirect all power to forward thrusters. We're ramming them." "Commander, that's what humans taught us," Al finished. His ship accelerated directly at the Devourer command vessel. Impact. Both ships exploded. Escape pods launched, carrying his crew to safety. Dr. Hansara, working frantically in a research station, finally found the answer she'd been seeking. "General, I've been analyzing devourer behavior. They're still predicting rational responses. Every time we do something that makes no tactical sense, their coordination breaks down slightly. So we need to be even more irrational," said. "Exactly. The hive mind cannot process true chaos. If every defender makes independent, unpredictable decisions, transmitted to all forces, all ships, all ground units, stop following any plan. Every commander make your own decisions, be creative, be unpredictable, be human. The effect was immediate. The Devourer fleet, which had been systematically destroying Earth's defenders, suddenly couldn't predict anything. Human ships attacked from directions that made no sense. Ground forces retreated, then ambushed pursuers. Damaged vessels became bombs. Empty buildings became traps. The hive mind tried to adapt, but there were too many variables. 10,000 independent human commanders, each making different choices. 40 species of aliens who'd learned human tactics. Millions of civilians fighting however they could. It was chaos, perfect, beautiful chaos. Defiance was destroyed for real this time, but she survived in an escape pod. She watched from orbit as the Devourer fleet, despite overwhelming numbers, began to fracture. Their coordination was breaking down. Units were making errors, attacking each other, falling into traps. "They're retreating," said in disbelief from her own pod. "The Devourers are actually retreating." And they were. The hive mind had calculated and recalculated. The odds said they should win, but the reality was chaos it couldn't process. Earth's defenders were losing, but they weren't breaking. Every position that fell cost more Devourer forces. Every ship destroyed took enemies with it. The hive mind made a decision. This victory cost too much. It's 70% of its forces from Sol system, retreating to analyze what had gone wrong. Earth was devastated. Cities burned. Orbital platforms were destroyed. 40% of the defending forces were dead. By any rational measure, it was a catastrophe. But Earth was still there. Humanity survived. Weeks later, Captain Lee stood on the ruins of Sol, her arm in a sling. The city was but standing. Rebuilding had already begun. Ambassador found her there. The Assembly wants to restructure their entire military doctrine based on human principles. "We didn't do anything special," said. "We just fought the only way we know how." "That's what makes it special," a new voice said. Commander Al approached, his scales marked with scars from the battle. "We spent 10,000 years developing civilized warfare, predictable, sustainable, safe. But the galaxy isn't safe anymore. The Devourers taught us that. You taught us how to survive anyway." More Assembly commanders arrived. All of them bore the marks of battle. All of them had fought for Earth. "We're drafting a new military oath," Al said. "We wanted you to hear it." He transmitted the document. Read the final line. "We fight not because we will win, but because surrender means extinction, as Earth taught us." She smiled despite her exhaustion. That's the most human thing I've ever heard a non-human say. We learned from the best, Al replied. High above, in the ruins of orbit, recovery crews worked to rebuild. Assembly volunteers worked beside humans, learning how to repair, how to rebuild, how to keep going after devastation. Because that was the real lesson Earth taught the galaxy. Not how to fight, but how to survive. How to look at impossible odds and fight anyway. How to face extinction and refuse to accept it. The Devourers were still out there. The war wasn't over. But the galaxy had learned something the Devourers would never understand. Humans don't survive because they're stronger or smarter. They survive because they come from a world where giving up meant death, so they never learned how to quit. And now, fighting as Earth taught them, the galaxy wouldn't quit either.